Good. Anxiety is the capitalist affect of the modern era. Anxiety has become the linchpin for modern violence. As violence manifests itself in the criminalization of the activities, labeling the participants as deviants like we see in 14 today's public spheres, governments, anxious anxiety spread from local location to the whole social field, all forms of self-expression, enjoyment, and related anxiety has become the linchpin of subordination, one major part of the underpinning of anxiety is the omnipresent web of surveillance. We need to think ways in which in the neoliberal ideas of success and inculcate surveillance mechanisms. We think about how people's voluntary self-exposure assumes a performance in the field of the perpetual gaze of virtualized the ways in which this gaze reflects how we know one another's factors in perpetual performance. Public space is bureaucratized and privatized. Human activity is criminalized on the grounds of security, quality of life, right social behavior. In this field, we are commanded to communicating and keeping people is exclude this threat is manifest in disciplinary practice, accommodating and solitary confinement. Such regimes are the 0 degree of control by anxiety, the breakdown of all coordinates of connected society and concentration in order to produce a collapse of personality precarity. This type of insecurity which treats people as disposable to impose control of precarity leads to generalized hopelessness economically. Aspects of anxiety including production, yet the globalization of production, in which the gap between the officials and what really happens is greater than ever. Question on global climate change supplies for anxiety into global politics. The public narrative is more stress will keep you safe. The secret of anxiety has led to latent anxiety to feel social regulation, control over minorities. IPC in 14 anxiety and stress their public safety. That understands psychological problems landed on the faulty thought pattern. Public narrative suggests we need more stress to keep us safe and competitive. Each new round of oppressive laws that should be weighted to anxiety from overregulation, human insecurity challenge into securitization. Securitization increases conditions cause anxiety. The security of homeland institutions. They substitute for the security of the self people's lack of control with lies to struggle to reclaim control by micromanaging whatever one can. Land anxiety is around precarity, feel social regulation and social control projected onto minorities. Anxiety is personalized in a number of ways, from right discourse blaming the poor for poverty to therapies which treat anxiety dysfunctional thinking style management. Discourse offers anxious focusing an illusion of control in return for conformity. The capitalist model of subjectivity, discourse of criminalization to precarity as deviance. Doctrines of individual responsibility are central to backlash, reinforcing vulnerability, disposable with massive outpouring of communities telling people how to achieve success with positive thinking as if anxiety and frustration are illusory. These are indicative of the tendency to privatize problems. People have to be isolated or for a secret to where communication happens only through past mediated by the system. People are prevented from communicating even while the system demands everyone be connected and effective. Delivered does not living anxiety, compound suffering while simply distracting consumers. The recomposition of libertarian social question of happiness or channels through which the secret can be spoken is difficult to acknowledge reality of what they're experiencing. Feel something has to be quantified or organized, which should be validated as really public secrets not meet these criteria, and so it remains invisible. And the state is articulating ways to keep the secret of anxiety, formulating a truth regime. Through this truth regime, marijuana for one has come to represent a threat to the state's reported authority. This state sanctioned morally correct is objective science for closest alternative truth to actualize this truth regime and triggers a disciplinary self-policing by citizens which make resistance or changes to their unimaginable. Elysium 13 decurrent discourse and nuance who types of marijuana use to course on marijuana, as you understand marijuana subject pay attention to whether it has to manage use of cannabis plant marijuana modern size will to contribute on this topic on the control of the diet place restriction on to research proposed must be approved the FDA and GDO where research on marijuana is possible most proposed to approve orange to marijuana how to make it difficult to run its use scientific knowledge to develop believer for official side objective research to support their patients for the climate temperature of the bias biochemical contaminated marijuana or the most stress really represents science here the ultimate truth penalty third biochemical authorities claim that elements cause mechanisms are unchecked triggers of the space of the transparent situation known unnotification overshadow less commercial friendly opponents so long as biochemical contains are illumination rather than fabrication challenges participant trying to participate from they cannot claim expertise the state possesses research challenge but need to be well situated knowledge communities which require form of leverage city possess the state able to participate challenge before the game begins does by criminalizing contact marijuana stigmatizing symbolic contact according to go the phenomena is not unique for perfect illustration way in which power should they say for social control the TSA teaches citizens to police themselves is made off the state restriction field of fields productive of knowledge which regard research in support of conservative hegemonic moral behind the doors of scientific and rally blockways with the scientific objectivity diffuses throughout overlapping social fields colonizing every social institution that lead back to state-centered moral and diffusion to stay morally pervasive quality seen everywhere and where individuals assume rarely comes from within themselves, they rallies inscribed upon the human body. Social control is not perfect. The instability of such authority, counter knowledge will spill over marijuana science represent a point of vulnerability. Dr. Abrams' simplicity use of marijuana for relief of necessity after years of rejection because we wrote a study of harmful interaction of marijuana and nature, slightly correction, but did not figure out patch marijuana for research TH record, and there's no good of it. They don't want an honest trial, such to help weaken the credibility of federal agencies. There's appearances for openly discussing marijuana brings stigma, few physicians, scientific research, and public debates on arrest suppression, non-typical generating knowledge, making generates more heat to the effects of cannabis in this constant regulation, conduct, and thought to guard against the racial logic by political control. The war on drugs is a perfect example. This logic Edwards and 12 politics and modern society's operation around the concept of vigilance struggle against the enemy of regulation, conduct, and human population to preserve, in order to preserve and extend, like to protect from internal and external enemies, clearly essential. Feature modern lives, whether it be war, drugs, or war on terror, we need to be concerned about the profound impact of the enemy and the enemy that is produced and reproduced in discourse and practice of politics we are immersed in on our everyday lives. And biopower articulates racist, colonial, and fascist systems of balance to constantly reproduce the other in violence and oppressive ways, saying in six sovereignty, the powers of defend normally legality, the power of decision of life itself, and has observation versus the institutionalized practice of racism has been a means of legitimating the murderous function of the state priest because the means by which the sovereign right to kill is raised from a central political field of courts to switch frameworks within a sufficiently dense field of historical reference and strategic analysis, not to say the figures of historical racism exhaust all possible means of natural that racial, colonial, fascist genealogy without their own breaks, contradiction, instruction, done as the failure to interrogate and effectively confront ways in which contemporary displays U.S. state power with enjoying old and fabricating new measures of measurement and humanity today places the entire world in danger. Thus, Doug and I advocate for the embracement of anxiety through the legalization of marijuana. The affirmative is the affirmative way of embracing one's anxiety by ending the criminalization of marijuana, making it the affirmative a tool to combat anxiety. Embracement is key to create mobilization against the vulnerable capitalist state apparatus. IPC in 14 term periods of mobilization to the restriction of people in power, which can act as an effective treatment for social psychological problems such as transformation have become rare. Preemptive tactics are of this to stop protests before they start or achieve anything. Punishment by process entails keeping people in a situation of fear or vulnerability through the abusive procedure designed for other purposes. Once the fear of state interferences until reinforced by visible surveillance spread across public space, which acts as triggers of anxiety. The effects are, as when the state was killing people but are rendered invisible, you're failing to escape protection of anxiety. What we need is a machine for fighting anxiety. There's something we don't have. If we see from within anxiety and perform a reversal of perspective seen from the standpoint of society to the power of current resistance is not combating anxiety. It involves the liberating expression of high anxiety situations. It is difficult for people to pass from anxiety to anger. It is easy for people to be pushed out the other way. Anxiety is a material force rooted in space overcoming. It's very as simple as consciously rejecting structurally the system is vulnerable. The reliance on anxiety desperate measures using the abstract approach to conformity systems attempt to keep running into the by keeping people feeling powerless, leads an open set of ruptures outbreaks of revolt. The experience of marijuana is necessary to break down dominant ground logics of the state through anxiety. Only the appropriation of the self through the legalization of marijuana can solve capitalism and biopolitics. Derrida, 89. The equivocation of discourse of what we observe and discourse that dominate our society. Critical and transparent, questioning, thoughtful reflection of problematic issues. We have a state to fast under conceptual opposition of nature, also emancipation, alienation, public private, etc. We imagine that the Germanic writers seek to discover graceful inspiration by the grace of technical, artificial, and ever and territorial violence of and inflation by taking myself inside the body, inside myself, and more by the inside a state of productive receptivity and a transcendental imagination will let it go in the balance of and to put an end to transcendental imaginary discourse can done by society based on work thought that can be appropriated and approaches to make them proper to itself and more stuff in the found outside of the value properness or property appropriation or reappropriation of the making of the properties of every mode of foreignness being alienation by recognizing someone's resorting to drugs that find no better word than experience of one from which one cannot return like the trip the experience is right with the rapport to the other with an opening of the way in which the world in general. And on the other hand we have the organized experiment, the experimental as an organized way to have to take no less here than the self-conscious of the alienation of one's own body for the foreign, but the real, and the one. I could go on. And our approach is one of forging affinity groups, and our approach is our approach is key to forging affinity groups. The conscious raising is a necessary pressure to build dismantle capital systems. IPC in 14 to the point is not something to recount experience, but to transform them through their theorizations, just often by finding patterns and experience that seeking personal problems of injustice and symptoms of wider structural problems leads to 80% of vocabulary. What is an anti-political rise, and the goal is to reduce the colloquial focuses and transform like make it easier for to respond with anger instead of anxiety, resulting in affinity group and orientation from perspective analysis. Result new awareness turn to action. These groups and provide a pool of accomplices prime people for revoking the potential to shift public opinion, which create easier context for action when the functions of public discussion, conscious and construct a perspective from which one can interpret the situation. We can stop for respect from daily sugar participants. We need to learn to speak with the self-expressive voice and to listen and analyze the partitions down as new propositions about the sources of anxiety. These propositions can form the basis of new forms of structural revival of active force of the current repressionary machine for fighting anxiety.
Are you good?
Yeah.
All right. Are you going to defend that marijuana should be legalized?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll defend the outcomes of the plan, but we don't think the process through it is important.
Okay, so in a world in which marijuana is legalized, what regulations exist?
No regs.
No regs.
No regulations.
No
Okay.
prohibitions.
So in the world we have, the government exists, the state exists, but people can do whatever they want with marijuana and there's no regulations.
So the app would make the argument that one, the government may or may not exist. Our last piece of IPC evidence says that affinity groups we can prime people to revolt and to rebel against the government, which means that we
Against
can...
the government. It's tagged as saying that affinity groups dismantle capitalist systems.
i.e. what the state is right now.
Okay, yeah, I guess then you've read a couple pieces of evidence that the AF dismantles capitalism. Where do you think is your best line for legalization equals disrupting capitalism?
So the Melisa evidence is really good about the context of how marijuana is disruptive to the status quo way of forming knowledge. The IPC evidence is evidence is about how when that sort of forefronting of the deviant, allowing for new forms of knowledge to occur, that enables us to be primed for that sort of action against the state.
I guess I'm just asking, do you think you have one piece of evidence that includes the argument that marijuana should be legalized or not prohibited, and that does something for capitalism?
I think the connection of the affirmative makes that argument.
Also, the Melisa evidence talks about
Okay.
dominant power structures, which we've identified as
Okay,
capitalism.
is there any violence that occurs that is not caused by anxiety?
We've isolated the way capitalism uses anxiety in the modern era, and that we have to revolt against that specifically. We've isolated
So
capitalism.
anxiety doesn't cause violence, it's just a tool.
The anxiety
that's
that
being
capitalism uses currently is what causes all violence in the status quo.
causes all violence and sex. Okay. The second card that you read says that this public narrative, which this evidence is about, like public trials or like clinical trials for medical marijuana, fuels social regulation and control over minorities. What does that look like?
What do you mean? Can you repeat the question?
This evidence is like we're afraid of hurting people through clinical trials of medical marijuana. What kind of social control is a result of
The Melisa
that?
evidence is actually in a broader context about how the state has used the criminalization of marijuana in order to prohibit research on marijuana, and then uses that as a justification for why we can't do research to like prove that their
The
reasoning
card
for not
that's
doing
tagged
research is
fueling social regulation is IPC, and it's like talking about how we have to keep people safe from clinical trials. I guess I'm just confused
that
about
piece of
where we
evidence is in
get.
the context of the way anxiety is used in like modern scenarios. Like it regulates people, and the laws proliferating that create this sort of regulation allow for latent anxieties, which fuel like social interaction.
I guess my original question was just like, what's an example of social regulation?
What's an example of social
You can't
regulation?
smoke marijuana.
What is an example of one that causes like? Okay, that's fine.
That's one. We would isolate that as one that causes.
You get
violence.
arrested for smoking marijuana, that probably causes social anxiety.
Okay.
I'm setting it up.